Welcome into the Sporting News Studios as we talk Pocono. Tom Vandervoort sitting alongside my colleague Bob Pockris. Now, Bob, we are going back to Pocono for the second time. It's always a pretty short gap between the two races. So first of all, do you feel like there's going to be enough of a change from the first Pocono race to the second Pocono race that will shake things up a little bit or a lot, or how much?
I mean, I would say a little bit. You know, I think teams learn, especially we're talking Gen 6 cars. So, you know, maybe they worked on something at Indianapolis also that they could help with their Pocono setups. But for the most part, who is good in June will be good in August. And, you know, you never know. There could be the thing is, if I remember right, didn't Kyle Busch have a problem early in the race in June? And you know, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's a factor this time around.
Now, the challenge of this track has always been, obviously, it's triangular, long straightaways, tight corners, 3 different corners, different radius, different banking, different length. So you got to compromise. You got to figure out how to run these different corners differently and still have a good, fast overall lap time. Does that incline you towards any particular set of drivers?
No, I think you're just going to want to be good, I would say, in turn 3 because you want to have all the momentum coming down the long front stretch. The
longest patch of straight asphalt in NASCAR.
That's right. So I would say that's key. And then, you know, they have some rumble strips in turn 2, and you certainly don't want to hit those. So, you know, I think those are kind of the two keys to getting around there. You know, look who's been good in the past. Johnson, Gordon, you know, those guys are going to be tough to beat.
Kurt Busch has had a good feel for this track.
Tony Stewart also has a pretty decent feel for this track.
Junior's not bad here, Bob.
Junior, he third last time out in June. I'd expect him, you know, to run well, and wouldn't be surprised at all if he's a factor come the end of the race.
You know, you talk about turn 3. I think of that as a turn that's real easy to overdrive because it is so flat. It's a little bit different now, I guess, with the repave, but a guy that can really finesse his way through there and get back on the gas nice and early to extend that front stretch is a guy that's going to do well here. But a guy that used to do that so very, very well, Denny Hamlin. What do you feel about Denny right now at this track?
Man, he's in a huge funk right
now. He really is.
He's just struggling. You know, I don't know. I'm not expecting
hard to put your finger on it, isn't it?
I'm not expecting a whole lot from him this weekend. You know, but he could be there to take advantage of other people's mistakes because Pocono, let's face it, it's a little bit of a tough pit road, even though it's really wide, have a tendency to have some speeding penalties there. And it's a track position game in a lot of ways. So, you know, I mean, Denny Hamlin could have a shot if he qualifies well and things kind of go smoothly, but that really hasn't been that team's MO.
Not this year, not at all. All right, we've got some picks to make, and to do that, we're going to come right back with Miss Sprint Cup, so stick around. And we are back, and as promised, joining us for the second week in a row, Miss Sprint Cup, Jacqueline Roney. So you did pretty well last week, Jacqueline. You picked Jimmy Johnson. He probably should have won the race.
But he
was the top finisher in our little competition.
It's true, and I picked him, so.
So you got 3 points.
Where am I now?
So you are still in third, but you are making up ground. Because I picked, who did I pick? Oh, Tony Stewart. Tony was the second highest finisher among our picks. Juan Pablo Montoya, who was Steven's pick, Bob. I know you're sitting in for Steven this week.
I didn't get to pick last week.
He came in last among the 3 picks. So that means Steven and I are tied for the lead, but you did make up some ground, Jacqueline.
Good.
So well done. Another chance for you this week. And, you know, because you are still third and because we do it every week, we're going to give you the first pick.
Thank you. And ladies first, right?
Ladies first.
All right, my guy, I'm going with Jeff Gordon this weekend.
Jimmy did all that for you? You just going to cast him aside for Jeff?
Just like that. Teammate Jeff. You know, he's got 6 wins at Pocono. It's hard to argue with that. And that's it.
Okay.
I'm going with Jeff.
Jeff Gordon. All right, Bob. You're picking for Steven, so I guess we're calling you Beaven again?
You know, every time I like last week, if I was on here, I would have picked Jeff Gordon. And every time it always kind of comes up a little bit short every time I've picked him. So I wasn't going to pick Jeff Gordon, and now I'm glad since you've already got him, and I know then he'll probably end up disappointing you like he's disappointed anybody else who's picked him this year. So, but
Wow, you sound a little bitter, my friend.
I'm going to stay at Hendrick Motorsports. And I am not going with Jimmy Johnson.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Dale Earnhardt Jr.
Really?
Yeah, I like that pick.
Third at Pocono in June. Strong car at Indy. If this team could just have tightened all the wheels, you know,
that always helps. I find
tighten
it's
before
a
the start of the race.
From here in the studio. Tighten
I think this team has kind of probably come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, a little bit angry, and not that Jimmy Johnson won't be have a little bit of chip on their shoulder.
Yeah, we know how that usually turns out.
But, you know, I got to go with kind of a feel-good story. We've had some feel-good stories in Brian Vickers and and last week with Ryan Newman, so I'm going to go with the feel-good story of Dale Earnhardt Jr.
I like that.
You guys are very generous with your picks. It'd be great if Jeff were to win and Junior were to win. It'd be obvious, but I got to take the layup here and pick Jimmy. I mean, look, this reminds me so much of the first Pocono race. He comes off a race at Dover, which he dominated and should have won. Pit road penalty, ends up not winning the race, comes in with a chip on his shoulder, to quote you, Bob, dominates and wins. I feel like I'm seeing the same thing. Here he comes off an Indy race, where he probably should have won it. Now he comes back to Pocono. We're not that far away from the first Pocono race. It just seems too obvious. Now I will say this. I noticed that if you look at the Indy-Pocono comparison, if you compare the top 10s from those two races, 60% overlap. You know, and Junior is one of those guys. Joey Logano, another guy. Ryan Newman and Tony Stewart finished in the top 10 in both those races. So I think that's kind of interesting because you do have the long straightaways and the fairly flat corners.
Well, when in doubt, pick Jimmy.
When in doubt, pick Jimmy is always a good rule. Okay, so you've got Jeff. You've got, who'd you pick again? Oh, yeah, Junior.
We're
of
like
course.
Team Hendrick
How
this
could I
week. We
forget?
didn't even plan this.
That's true. Not a bad way to go. All right, for Bob and Jacqueline, I'm Tom. We'll see you next time.